Good afternoon. This presentation is a little bit different than the others, and I'm not really going to talk much about Asterisk as much as I am just cloud services in general. Just as a preparatory note, I'm an independent consultant. I don't sell hardware or software. My job is to go out in enterprises and do the user interviews and determine what requirements are, and turn those into requirements that end up in RFPs that we send out to providers. Now, just by show of hands, how many folks in the audience here are providers of telecom services? Okay, a few. How many consider themselves users of telecom services in their organizations? Users or support people that have to keep them running. Okay, great. We'll go through the first few slides here pretty quickly because they're kind of basic. Typically, we'll go through the typical ownership options, define some of the drivers, some of the factors that are involved in selections, and discuss examples. And of course, the last slide in the presentation says questions. But if you have any along the way, please don't hesitate to bring them up as we're going through. I have three case studies that I've included in the slides, but I'd certainly like to hear some from yourselves as well. Traditional ownership models, traditional on-premise, big iron PBXs, which are getting smaller as they now evolve into server-based systems. Managed services, which can be either on-premise or off-premise, and then the true hosted or cloud services, and each one implies a different level of support obligations for the people that have to maintain them. The slides will be available afterwards if you like. They'll be available on the website, or I've got them on a thumb drive here if anybody wants to copy them. Okay. Some of the typical business drivers that you'll hear from CIOs, these are kind of a sum as I go from engagement to engagement. They'll vary a little bit, but they all kind of total down into the same set of requirements. For financial, they want to reduce operating costs, decrease capital, become more productive. I put reduce support staff labor, even though going into an engagement, a lot of times they'll tell me that's a stated goal. They want to reduce headcount. It very rarely ever happens, because as these systems get more complex, they want to do more with them. And when you do more with them, it takes more support staff. So while they gain some efficiencies and gain some new features, I really don't see a whole lot of headcount reductions when we go from engagement to engagement. Tactical, of course, become more productive. Support the modern workforce. It's increasingly mobile. One of the small case study examples that I've included here, has an office, a government contracting office that has 50 or so people in their core office, but they have 160 people working from home. So those workforces are increasingly not within your walls. It allows staff to focus on a core business. People, the end users, as much as we think this is cool stuff, end users really don't care about telecom technologies. They don't really care what the phone system is. They don't care if it's Asterisk or Broadsoft or Siemens or Fujitsu. They want the phone to work because it's a tool. And tools do two things. They do something for you and they do something to you. And it's our job as technologists to maximize one and minimize the other. Strategic, certainly position an organization for growth and advancement in services that they can provide. Increasing number of complex applications. That's kind of what keeps us all in business, is the applications keep getting more expansive, more complex. Again, support new workplace realities and support what are increasingly global operations. Hosted services, typical considerations. Again, as I go from engagement to engagement, there are reasons to go to the cloud, and there are some reasons that keep people from going to the cloud. Predictable operational expenses, increasing staff focus on core technologies. The last one there, I'm not going to read them all to you, but the last one there, reduced risk of failed deployment with an experienced provider. A lot of times that's true, but of course nothing is 100%. Right? The cons, or the negative reasons about data security, regulatory compliance. I do probably at least 75% of my engagements in hospitals and healthcare, and I also do financial institutions, so government regulations as to where data is stored, where data is copied, particularly for HIPAA, for patient information. There are very strict guidelines on what you can and can't do. Okay? Perceived lack of industry customization, resistance from internal IT staff. Run across that more times than you would think. And loss of failure to include all cost elements in analysis, and a loss of enterprise control. Know your provider, technology factors, and business factors. Again, I'm an independent telecom consultant. I try to help people find the right solution, whatever that solution might be. I've been in this business for 39 plus years. I say 39 plus because once you go over 40 years, it just really sounds awful. 46, it just sounds like too much. Core platform configuration, again, when it comes down to the final selection, it's not my business to care what brand name is on the box. It's does that solution fit that particular business need? And that's what drives the solutions in our engagements, the business need, not the color of the box, not the name on the box. It's a question of not just the product, but the support structure. I'll name a couple of brands as we're going through this, but again, there's no endorsements involved here. A large hospital in Miami, I placed Siemens in that, a 5,000 station hospital. My next engagement was in Kansas City, where the Siemens folks in that area were not quite as prepared to support a hospital. It's not as important for me to know when I'm evaluating a dealer or evaluating a product. It's not as important for me to know that Siemens has done hospitals, because I know they do, but has a dealer in that area ever supported a hospital? So we'll spend as much time evaluating the dealership and their support capabilities as we will whatever product name it is. Okay? Disaster recovery, disaster avoidance policies, certainly important. Test plans, and do they have the flexibility? Not just the product again, but the dealer itself. Can they take advantage of new work models, mobility options, multi-site centers? Because even something like a hospital, where you'll have a core hospital of 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 stations, it's huge. They'll also have 10, 20, or 30 local community clinics that'll have 5 people in one clinic, 30 people in another. So again, it's what support models are available to support both large and small implementations. The business factor, proven track record with operational reference sites. Again, it's not as important for me to know that a particular manufacturer has supported a healthcare or a higher education institution or financial institution. Has the dealer in that area supported those kinds of clients? Are they a complete solution provider? Are they prepared to be that single point of contact, not just for themselves, but for subcontractors as well? I did a Blue Cross up in Delaware, where the winning solution in that environment was Avaya. Well, an Avaya subcontractor caused them to miss a delivery date, which caused my client to incur an extra $40,000 rental fee. Well, we held them responsible for that, and there was a lot of fussing on that, but it's written into the RFPs, written into the contracts that you're responsible for not just yourself, but the subcontractors. Typical checklist factors, again, know your business objectives, 1, 3, 5-year plan. We extend those out even further. Most of the total cost of ownership models we do will run out 7, 10, sometimes 12 years, depending on the business model of that particular client. Because as much fun as this is, nobody really wants to buy a telephone system. There's probably nothing more invasive in an organization than, except maybe perhaps the lights and the plumbing, that creates more havoc than ripping out a phone system and replacing it. Okay? Let the business requirements drive the technology, not what the equipment or service vendor has to sell. Again, as a consultant, I'm often that guy that comes in after a sales rep has given his pitch to a customer, and they're just on fire to buy something. They don't know what they're going to do with it, but they just got to have it. or they'll read something in Sky Mall magazine, as they're flying from somewhere, and they'll come home, they'll come to their office and say, well, I need 3 of these. I said, well, what are you going to do with them? And that's where knowing the business and knowing the specific requirements of that particular client are important to make sure that the technology that they're looking at actually fits a business need. Look at all operational aspects, not just the initial cost. Do your due diligence, perform financial checks, reference checks of clients of similar size and complexity. And I put down in there also use first and second level references. What I refer to as second level references, just like you're on your own resumes, you're going to put down somebody who's going to say something nice about you. Well, when I do reference checks for clients, I will ask that reference that they've given, well, who else does this provider use? So that's a one-off. So again, that's part of doing that due diligence. Checklist factors, again, I attend probably a dozen conferences a year where manufacturers, distributors, system programmers will say, these are the 7 things you need to look for. And the next briefing will be, these are the 8 things you need to look for. And the next one will be, these are 12 things you need to look for. The next couple of slides are pretty much the ones that appear most common in those discussions. Insurance agreement is good for both parties. Operational maintenance fees, periodic upgrades. If the agreement sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Okay. Determine the total implementation costs. A salesman will be very precise about what the cost per station is, what the cost per port is, whatever system you're buying. They're not quite so precise on, what are the integration costs? If I need to integrate, an Avaya system but to a non-Avaya IVR, what's that going to cost? Or if I need to integrate interactive intelligence to a hospital's practice management system, those are not easy things to do. They can be done, but there's a cost involved. Plug and play never really is, What is the exit strategy and the cost? Putting in a system is only half the battle. You have to look towards the future to find out what does it cost to get away from that solution and include that in that total cost of ownership. What's the licensing model? Total seats or concurrent users? In many hosted applications, I recently did one for the call center that supports McDonald's IT functions in their 12,000 restaurants that they have around the world. There's a great difference in total cost of ownership between one hosted provider and another, because one hosted provider charged $250 a month for every concurrent user that was on the system. So they track agents as they log on and off. The other charged $250 a month for every agent that had in the system. So the cost model on that was way out of whack. They had 450 agents in the system, but only 300 of them online at any one time. So check the licensing model. Is your network ready? Quality of service and redundancy and diversity. 2 great concepts, but they don't mean the same thing. Okay? Redundancy, of course, is having more than one something. Diversity is taking different routes. It's nice to have 2 PRIs or two paths into your organization, to your facility for SIP trunking or whatever trunking you're using, but do they go through the same pipes? Do they go to the same central office? Okay. Is your organization ready? New data security models, stronger backup policies, moves, adds, and changes, and training. Negotiate service level agreements. Incentives and penalties, just the Blue Cross example I showed you. That's a $40,000 hit that Avaya took because a subcontractor missed a suspense date that my client would have had to eat. Training for everyone. Hospital in Miami, I did a hospital organization down there, a chain of 6 hospitals, where as we were cutting over the first system, we included training for every user in the hospital, 3,000 people. Well, about 30% of them showed up for training. So Monday morning, what do you think Monday morning was like? It was kind of a nightmare. The 1 week, help desk that we had arranged had to be extended to 2.5 weeks because they had to not only, go out and hold hands, they had to reconfigure vast parts of the configuration because the users didn't know how to use them. Now, on the second hospital cutover, 85% of the people showed up for training. So people will catch on, okay? But you need to make sure that as users and support people for telecom systems, that you include, training in for everybody that's there. For system administrators and support staff as well. Security and backups. Who does them? Where are they stored? Very key, depending on your industry. Healthcare, finance, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley. There's a lot of rules, a lot of regulations that need to be complied with. Include encryption keys in the backup. Many carriers will back up your data, but maybe not so much the encryption keys. Billing cycles, payment schedules, discounts and penalties, rate review and billing errors. There was a couple of sessions ago, a gentleman did a session on fraud. Well, there are limits, depending on the carrier, as to how far back you can go to recover those costs. Carriers will try to limit that to 30 days or 180 days, where most state utility commissions allow you to go back 2 years. So as you're negotiating agreements, make sure that those billing errors can be corrected and you can recover costs. I used to work for MCI. I worked for them for 5 years in their 800 network support center. And I like to think the best of people. I like to think that companies don't intentionally overbill, but I can tell you for a fact that next to network routing, network call routing, the billing systems these carriers use are some of the most complex and convoluted systems you could ever see, you could ever know. So I like to think of it as an unintentional overbilling, but again, something you need to keep a watch out for. Outage tracking and restoration, specific service level based goals. If you're paying for 7x24 monitoring and the sales approach was, we'll fix problems before you even know they're there. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean at 2 in the morning, if an alarm goes off, they're working on that problem before you come in? Or do they wait until 8 in the morning when your users come in and there's no downtime? When does that outage clock start? Make sure those kinds of things are negotiated into your service level agreements. Traditional versus hosted, 3 recent projects, but of course your mileage may vary, past performance, no guarantee future results. All those kinds of disclaimers will do. And again, perhaps the most important thing to remember is no vendor solution is right everywhere. Again, I've been doing this a very long time and I've never recommended the same solution 2 times in a row. I've also taken, just for time factors, I've taken a couple of the small ones out of here. This is a small government contracting office. They were growing from 40 to 57, moved into a new headquarters, 160 remote workers that were currently not on their system. They wanted them included, but they're not. We did the assessment. We evaluated alternatives, issued RFPs. The result is that single entity image that they were looking for. Here's the cost, how the costs broke out. This is a little bit of an eye chart, so I put a little summary in there. The option 1 was to move the current system. Option 2, best of 3 bids with expansion, and option 3 for hosted service. You can see the hosted. They were both of these solutions increased cost because, of course, they were going from 40 users to 57 on site in their office. But you can see the premise-based system, which I believe was a Mitel at the time, increased their cost only 11.5%, where the hosted service, the best bid we could get was 66%. Now, again, for time constraints, I pulled out one a similar size, where the costs actually worked out to be a little bit higher on the hosted solution, but that particular company, Geographic Imaging Company, had absolutely no support structure, no IT people at all. So even though the cost was higher, their corporate support model worked out to where the hosted solution was better for them. The second multi-site urban hospital. This is a hospital in North Philadelphia, one of those classic dirt poor inner city hospitals where every month they're on the verge of going bankrupt. They're a Centrex customer, spending incredible amounts of money. They had absolutely no capital funds available. In fact, they were at the time, they were under a housing urban development restriction from incurring any capital costs. So as we looked at the different options, just looked at this one since it's easier to see, they couldn't go out and actually purchase a system, so we arranged leasing options for them, a 3, 5, and 7-year lease. And you'll see that, over that 10-year period, even though the competitive hosted provider that we found for them was actually resulted in less of a cost savings factor, their organizational goal was to decrease cash flow. So by selecting this option, we were able to meet their business need in the very first month they went on the new hosted service. They were able to reduce their monthly cash flow. The next one was a large municipal city government, 13,500 stations, the Centrex user with 296 North Star key systems. And they were everywhere. They were in closets, they were in ceilings, they were under desks, they were everywhere. The municipal court building alone had 17. Every judge had his own, because every judge had his own telecom budget. So you had 17 systems, some of them with 3 stations, some of them with 8 stations, some of them with 12 stations. It just evolved that way over years. Again, after doing the assessment, we did a 12-year life cycle study for them. There's the eye chart again. We'll come back to that in just a second. Option 1 was we used as the current Centrex cost to do the cost comparisons, and then the pure hosted IP solution, managed service, the alternate hosted Centrex bid, and then the premise-based hybrid. And you'll see just, again, just in the summary here, what the recommendation was to go forward with a hybrid system. Not a pure IP system, because again, this is a city government. This was all the city departments, including police department, fire, parks and recreations. Throughout the assessment, we determined that there were probably about 10% of those stations that will never go IP. Yes?
When you assume a premise-based system, are you calculating the failure of product over the period of time compared to a host environment when they don't necessarily have that expense?
Sure.
What do you typically figure
well,
per year?
As failure? The configuration that we came up for this client was actually a dual solution. They had their primary cluster in their data center, and outside the core city, the core center city, on a different power grid and on different central office feeds, a redundant system. Yes?
When you look at the premise-based, do you include the cost of in-house support?
Oh, absolutely. This eye chart here is the tail end of about a dozen spreadsheets that crunches those kinds of numbers. Included in here is the cost of upgrading their infrastructure, because again, these are municipal court buildings that haven't been updated in 80 years. Crawling through the closets in the basement was pretty scary at times. They had a total of 788 locations that we surveyed. Again, we assumed the costs or included costs for infrastructure, for support people. Since it was a 12-year life cycle, we included not only costs for annual training, as the different versions come up and you need to send folks back for training, but every 3 years, a certain allowance for training new staff as staff leave. That was their model. They lose 25% of the support staff every 3 years. So we included retraining costs in there as well. Okay. If any of you are interested in seeing some more of the detailed ones, I'm here after the briefing and the rest of the day and half of tomorrow if you'd like to go over the detail of that. The different colors here, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but if you look at where the different colors are, the top chart represents just the bulk annual costs. And you'll see that you have to get into year 4 and 5 before you start see any savings on an annual cost. The bottom chart are cumulative costs, the roll-ups from year to year. And you'll see you're out here in year 7 and 8 before the cumulative costs start to show any savings from their current Centrex environment. So as you're proposing a project like this to your organizations, you'll need to do a long-term cost analysis for whatever period they're looking for. And in this case, the city wanted a 12-year cost, whether it's 12 or 10 or 7, whatever it is. And you need to be upfront with them to tell them that, for instance, in that top chart, your expenses for the first 4 years are going to be higher because during those 4 years, you're going to be operating 2 phone systems. You're going to be implementing your premise system. You're going to be fading away or phasing away from your current Centrex hosted provider. So for a certain period of time, you're going to have more expenses than usual. And they need to, your client, your support staff, your management will need to understand the total cost implications of that. Yes, sir.
These 3 case studies, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Were any of the RFP candidates asterisk-based or switch box-based solutions?
One of them was BroadSoft, and there were a couple of others that might have been asterisk-based, but they didn't let us know what was under the skin on one of the one hosted provider that did said they were BroadSoft. So again, as an independent consultant, I care, but I'm not supposed to care what's under the skin. I'm supposed to care if they can support the business needs, if the dealer in that area can support the client in the manner to which they need. Okay? And that's pretty much it. The next steps, again, just to discuss the examples, and there's the ask questions slide. So,
What's your percentage of hosted-based, hosted compared to premise-based?
still primarily premise-based. It's decreasing.
So
You
you're
know,
seeing a trend?
I'm seeing a trend, yeah. If you'd asked me that 5 years ago, I'd say 90-10, 90% premise, 10% hosted. Now it's about 60-40.
Do you think that's more of a financial in a lot of cases where you just don't have a capital expenditure budget?
Certainly, the last few years, capital's been an issue, but more so than capital, it's support people. Organizations are just having trouble finding and keeping support staff. So, again, that's a different business goal. Some organizations don't want to have any support staff, so they just don't want to mess with it anymore. And that's okay, as long as that's calculated into the total cost of ownership models. Because again, as support people, as people supporting your organizations, you need to give as clear a picture to your management as you can about what those implications are. Because again, they're just tools, right?
Are you also seeing cost of hosted solutions go down?
Not really. The first example of the small hosted solution, their basic cost was, I think, $17 per station, another $4 for voicemail, and as you go down the list, their call center agents were around $150 a month. So again, it's a mixed match of, again, whatever the business need of that client is. No, I'm not really seeing, a decrease in the cost of stations. If anything, I'm seeing an increase because more hosted providers are bundling larger feature groups so that their pricing structure is simpler, so that you won't have to go through that. Well, it's $17, but oh, you want voicemail, that's $4. Oh, you want, off-premise call routing, well, that's 75 cents a month per station. They're trying to make it simpler, and in making it simpler, the bundled pricing, is a little higher, actually. Okay. How are we on time?
You're on time.
On time? Okay.
You
I
have
think we got time, we have about 5 minutes. Okay, well again, if anybody would like to go over any of the more detailed, evaluation pieces of that, I'm available the rest of the day and at least half of tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.